The gulls that nudge and peck for existence are like the ships below them that nudge and grind at the docks of any marine city. They are transitory, capable of beauty, susceptible to savagery and hasty flight. They are like, say, poets. A poet does live here in Irishtown, out of the snout of Dublin's river, Anthony Cronin, a man who enjoys the small geometrical streets with the agreeable resonances of a mature community. Cronin's sense of place has discovered here, in his own words, local harmonies to his local heart.
Oh, it's marvellous. This is a real area, you know, with real people. It's a real community, in fact, which is getting very rare these days. What I mean is it's not some sort of anonymous place into which people have been herded from outside, built on some windswept heath in the last 6 months or 2 years. I remember I used to wake up every morning in London or Spain or wherever, and no matter how bad things were, I used to say to myself, well, at least thanks be to God I'm not in Dublin. And that feeling doesn't last over the years, you know. The Spás in Éireann comes to be the dominant feeling, I think, really. At least as far as I'm concerned.
Or maybe it's Spás in a particular kind of Éireann.
Well, you see...
The Dublin you didn't want to wake up in.
Ah, well, when you think of, you know, me living in Dublin, when I think of me living in Dublin, where else would I live but someplace like this? You know, certainly not suburbia. There are all sorts of places I couldn't afford to live, but there are many places I wouldn't want to. And, you know, this is exactly what,
I think the vast majority of Irish writers now do live in suburbia.
I suppose they do. I won't say God help them, but, you know.
So, I mean, why do you say that there's nowhere that somebody like you could live, but in fact in this area, in this house?
Well, you see, this sort of place has got a good deal of integrity of its own, and it isn't, you know, it isn't an awful product specifically of our time and of, you know, the naked commercial things of our time. It doesn't reek of newfound anything as suburbia does, sort of thing. This, incidentally, of course, is the first time I've ever owned a house of any description. In fact, it's the first time I've ever owned anything, barring a few books. But I intend to spend the rest of my days in it. I'm done with my wanderings. You know, I've dragged my weary bones across continents, across deserts, across mountains, across campuses, and I'm done with that. And I give due notice to all concerned that I'm done with it.
Here you live.
Here I am, and here I stay.
His now weary bones first felt the warmth of day in Enniscorthy, that agreeable town spanning the Slaney. Now nearly 50, his name established as a critic and novelist and commentator, as much as a poet, he enjoys a growing reputation as a somewhat acerbic artist-philosopher, an anti-literary establishment man, an outsider, probably by choice, if not by nature. Another poet has said of Cronin's poetry that Mr. Cronin is the man standing alone on the miserable seashore, or down at the corner of the block under the street lamp, who opens his mouth every 100 years, or thereabouts. That suggests some deep despair, a loneliness, and that tone certainly is there in his poetry. But a pilgrimage to the Wexford coast, and in particular to the old family hut on Ardamine Beach, a search for congruity among drift, drew his mind back, not to the lonelinesses of adolescence, but to the distorted way in which so many Irish writers use and have used their burden of birth and memory.
There's an awful lot of phony rootedness in Irish literature, including Yeats, as a matter of fact. And this suits the kind of outside notion of the Irishman, that he's sprung from a particular riverbed or a mountainside. Hence, all the people who sort of suffer from the Roddy the Rover syndrome, Kerry schoolmasters, and in latter days there has been a sort of resuscitation by the northerners. They seem to fancy the idea of having roots also. By and large, we're all much more itinerants in Ireland than our sort of day-to-day mythology would pretend. In common with, I think, most Irish people, I have no sense of ancestral rootedness other than in Ireland in general. Mind you, that doesn't mean that I don't have sometimes in my weaker moments a sort of yearning for an ancestral rootedness. Like Kipling coming back from India and pretending that he was a Sussex man, or Belloc, who was French, pretending the same kind of thing, which is, I think that's just the ordinary need for reassurance. In my cups, when I had cups, I was known to sing The Boys at Wexford and other ballads as if I had been sprung from this very soil on which we stand, but it isn't the case, I'm afraid.
Well, like other than you've no wish to use this Wexford coast as material, but then somebody did. Didn't Winifred Mary Letts?
She wrote a very moving little sort of bad poem about, I think, if I lay dying in some land where Ireland is no more than just a name. She said her soul would travel back to find that strand from whence it came. And she went on then about the harbour and the evening light. And then she finally wound up and said something, it's rather nice. The Wexford coast from Arklow to Cahors, my native land. Well, now, I don't feel that. Or what I do think is if I when I lie dying, hopefully in Ireland, but if in some land where Ireland is no more than just a name, I think probably memories and images of this particular spot here will recur to me. But that doesn't mean I'm pretending to be part of the woods and the trees and the fields and the ditches in the way that these ancestral boys, the Roddy the Rover boys do, the Kerry schoolmasters and all the rest of it. It just wouldn't be. It'd be a lie in my case.
With the exact length and pace of his father's stride, the son walks. Echoes and intonations of his father's speech are heard when he talks. Once, when the table was tall and the chair a wood, he absorbed his father's smile and carefully copied the way that he stood. He grew into exile slowly, with pride and remorse, in some ways better than his begetters, in others worse. And now, having chosen, with strangers, half glad of his choice, he smiles with his father's hesitant smile and speaks with his voice.
Cronin's voice is clear and distinctive. For years a traveller, he's unlikely now to resume his wandering. A changed Ireland makes new demands.
I think, though, that one ought to stubbornly say that this is one's country and here I intend to take up my stand. One ought almost to do it nowadays symbolically on behalf of all the other people who can't or who have been denied that right, because I think living in one's own country is as near to a fundamental human right, supposing there is such a thing, that can be justified philosophically as you can get. It's a very fundamental matter.
What about younger writers now, Tony? A lot of them still do seem to insist on living outside Ireland.
Well, I think those who insist on it for sort of, because they're in love with the idea of exile, are just out of date. They're toiling in the wake of genius. One has to go for a variety of reasons. In the dead Ireland of our youth, the appalling Ireland of the preposterous Ireland of the late 40s and early 50s, one went away simply because one couldn't stand all the rot and the rubbish and the lies and whatnot any longer. That day, thanks be to God, is gone. Everybody's presence is important. Places are duller and poorer for the absence of anybody, not just us.